And everybody cheered and they went crazy. And then about a half an hour later, black smoke came out.
And then the Passion of the Christ.
The Passion of the Christ.
The Passion of the Christ.
For the Passion of the Christ.
The Passion of the Christ made $600 million. It changed how Hollywood understood faith-based film. It made Mel Gibson one of the most controversial
A man doing extraordinary things in extremely difficult circumstances, and that's in the hell of war.
and commercially powerful directors on the planet. And now he's making the sequel. $200 million. IMAX cameras. Filming right now in Rome. Release date, Good Friday 2027.
I'm hoping next year sometime. There's a lot required because it's an acid trip.
An acid trip. That's the man who made The Passion of the Christ describing the sequel. And when you hear the full version of what he said, what this film actually covers, where it actually goes, what Gibson personally believes about every frame of it, you're going to understand why this might be the most ambitious Christian film ever attempted, and why some people are already terrified of it. This is Make Faith Famous. Let's get into it. Before we go any further, we need to establish something important. The Passion of the Christ was not a supernatural film. It was a brutal, hyper-realistic depiction of the crucifixion. Almost no special effects, no angels descending from clouds, no heavenly light shows, just a man being destroyed on a cross in real time, in Aramaic, with period-accurate detail that most Christian films are too afraid to show. That's what made it powerful. And that's what made 600 million people around the world sit in theaters, unable to look away. The sequel is going to be completely different, and Gibson has said so, bluntly, publicly, multiple times, in ways that have left journalists, Christians, and secular critics trying to figure out what exactly he's building. So today we're going to walk through exactly what Gibson has said, every major interview, every explosive quote, and then we're going to tell you what it actually means, theologically, cinematically, and spiritually. Because when you understand what Gibson is attempting, it's not crazy. It's one of the most faithful things a filmmaker has ever tried to put on screen. Before, Moment 1. Stand with us in telling the truth about faith. Like the video, subscribe, and send this to one friend who needs a lift. Moment 1. The quote that broke the internet, April 2023. The first time Gibson really opened up about what the sequel was going to be, it was 2023. He sat down with Outstanding Screenplays, a YouTube channel dedicated to craft conversations with filmmakers, and he described the two scripts he was working with. One script, he said, was conventional, structured, more of what you'd expect from a Passion sequel. The Resurrection, told cleanly. And then there was the other one. You're in hell. You're watching the angels fall. It's like crazy. Newsweek ran it. Hollywood Reporter ran it. Deadline ran it. The secular press treated it like a punchline. Mel Gibson's Jesus movie involves hell and fallen angels. What is happening? Christian Twitter treated it like a scandal. And both groups completely missed what he was actually describing. Because everything Gibson mentioned, the descent into hell, the fall of the angels, the cosmic scope from the beginning of the rebellion to the death of the last apostle, that's not Gibson going off script. That's Gibson going deeper into the script than almost any filmmaker has dared to go. The Apostles' Creed says it directly. He descended into hell. 3 words that most modern Christians skip over in a hurry, because nobody has ever made them make sense. Mel Gibson is about to make them make sense. With a $200 million budget and IMAX cameras. Moment 2. The Joe Rogan Conversation. January 2025. Nearly 2 years after the Outstanding Screenplays interview, Gibson went on Joe Rogan. Episode 2254. January 9th, 2025. And this time, the conversation went further than the acid trip headline, because Rogan pressed him. And when Gibson talks about this film with someone who's genuinely curious, not hostile, not trying to get a gotcha, you get something different. You get a man explaining his theology. Gibson confirmed the acid trip description, but then he went deeper. He talked about Sheol, the Hebrew concept of the realm of the dead, distinct from the Christian concept of hell but connected to it. He talked about the scope of the film, that it doesn't just cover the 3 days between the crucifixion and the resurrection. It goes from the fall of the angels to the death of the last apostle. That's not a sequel. That's an entire cosmic arc.
Which is you're in another place. You're in another realm. You know, you need to go to hell. You need to go to Sheol. Goes from like the fall of the angels to the death of the last apostle.
Here's what Gibson is drawing from. And this is where it gets genuinely fascinating for anyone who knows their scripture. The harrowing of hell is one of the oldest doctrines in Christianity. The idea that between Good Friday and Easter Sunday, Christ descended into the realm of the dead, not as a victim but as a conqueror, and released the souls of the righteous who had died before him: Abraham, Moses, David, the patriarchs and prophets who had lived and died in faith, waiting. 1 Peter chapter 3. He went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison. Ephesians chapter 4. He descended into the lower parts of the earth. The Council of Rome in 382 AD included it in the Creed. Dante built the entire first canticle of the Divine Comedy around it. And nobody has ever put it on film, because nobody has had the nerve. Gibson has the nerve, and apparently the $200 million. Moment 3. The language decision. Here's a detail from the JRE conversation that almost nobody picked up on, and it tells you everything about how seriously Gibson is taking this. The Passion of the Christ was filmed entirely in Aramaic and Latin, no English. Gibson made that call against the advice of everyone around him. The studio said it would tank the film. It didn't. It grossed $600 million in languages nobody in a multiplex had spoken for 2,000 years. For the sequel, Gibson confirmed on JRE that the film will be in English. And when Rogan pushed back, sort of surprised, Gibson explained his reasoning. The film covers territory that spans different languages, different eras, different realms. To force it all into dead languages would create an artificial barrier. The supernatural content requires a different approach. This is a man who has thought about every single frame of this film for 20 years. The language decision isn't laziness. It's a theological choice about accessibility. Gibson believes this story, the full cosmic arc, belongs to everyone, not just scholars who can follow the subtitles. Here's a question for the comments. Are you more excited or more nervous about a Passion sequel that goes to hell and covers fallen angels? Drop it below. I want to know where you land. Alright, back in. Because we haven't even gotten to the part where Gibson talks about what he personally believes. And that conversation is the one that nobody in Hollywood wanted him to have. Moment 4. Jim Caviezel, the man who wanted to come back. You cannot tell the story of this sequel without talking about Jim Caviezel. Caviezel played Jesus in The Passion. He suffered physically for that role in ways that are almost impossible to summarize. Dislocated shoulder, hypothermia, open heart surgeries, a lightning strike during filming. And for 22 years, he has talked about the sequel the way a man talks about something he knows is coming for him. Not a job, a calling. In April 2025, on the Arroyo Grande show, Caviezel said something that tells you everything about where his head was.
But it's a continual thing. I'm not going to play Jesus. I need him to play me. It's the only way that this thing is going to work.
I need him to play me. That is not the language of an actor preparing for a role. That is the language of a man who has spent 22 years understanding that what happened on that set was not acting. It was something else. And then, in October 2025, Gibson replaced him. A Finnish actor named Jaakko Otonen, known for The Last Kingdom, was cast as Jesus in the sequel. Caviezel was out. Gibson has not explained the decision publicly. Caviezel has not attacked Gibson publicly. And I want to say something about that. Because in 2025, in an entertainment culture where everyone immediately goes on social media to air their grievances and burn bridges, two men who clearly have a complicated relationship chose silence and dignity. Whatever the reason for that decision, however it felt personally, neither man turned it into content. That's worth noting. In a world that runs on reaction, choosing not to react is its own kind of statement. Moment 5. I do actually believe this stuff to the full. And now we get to the part of the JRE conversation that I think is the center of everything. Because Rogan didn't just ask Gibson about the film. He asked him about what he believes. And Gibson, who has been in Hollywood for 40 years, who has been destroyed in the press, who has been through personal collapse and public humiliation, and a comeback that nobody predicted, didn't hedge. He said something so direct, in such a casual setting, that it barely got covered. Because it wasn't provocative enough for the secular press, and it wasn't packaged enough for the Christian press. He talked about the resurrection specifically, not as a story, not as a metaphor, as an event.
Resurrection is the one that is the most difficult for people to swallow.
Yes.
That's the one that requires the most faith.
The most faith and the most belief, yeah, resurrection.
Yeah.
Who gets back up 3 days later after he gets murdered in public? Who gets back up under his own power? Buddha didn't do that shit.
I do actually believe this stuff to the full. He didn't say I was raised to believe it. He didn't say it's a meaningful story. He said, I believe this, completely. The resurrection. The man who was murdered publicly, in front of witnesses, and then got back up 3 days later under his own power. And here's what makes that sentence so striking. Mel Gibson is sitting across from Joe Rogan, one of the most listened to voices in secular American culture, with an audience of tens of millions, and he's not softening it. He's not looking for the version of the sentence that will go down easier. He's saying, "This happened. I believe it happened. And I'm about to spend $200 million telling you the part of the story nobody has ever tried to tell before." That's not a filmmaker's pitch. That's a creed. And the reason it matters, the reason this film matters, the reason this conversation matters, is because the resurrection is not the comfortable part of Christianity. Anyone can follow the ethics. Anyone can appreciate the Sermon on the Mount. The resurrection is the thing that divides everyone, because it's either the most important event in human history or it's not. Gibson has decided which one it is, and he's putting it on an IMAX screen. Moment 6. Why the acid trip label is actually good news. Let's address the critics directly. Because the acid trip framing has made a lot of people nervous, and I think the nervousness is coming from the wrong place. The secular press used it as a punchline. Gibson's Jesus movie is going to be psychedelic. That's not what he said, and that's not what he's making. Some Christians used it to worry that Gibson was drifting, that he was adding to Scripture, that the film would be too weird, too speculative, too Hollywood. Here's the thing. The fall of the angels. That's in the Bible. Jude 1:6, 2 Peter 2:4. The descent into hell. That's in the Creed, in 1 Peter, in Ephesians. The cosmic scope of what happened between the crucifixion and the resurrection, the breaking of death's power, the release of the captives, the defeat of principalities and powers. That's Paul. That's Colossians 2:15. That's not Gibson's imagination. That's the testimony of the early church. Gibson isn't inventing a supernatural Jesus film. He's adapting the supernatural Jesus that Scripture already describes, the one that most churches have quietly edited out because it's hard to explain in a 45-minute Sunday service. And here's the commercial reality, which Gibson understands better than anyone. Controversy historically drove people to the Passion of the Christ. The attacks made people curious. The curiosity filled theaters. A PR expert named Steve Honig told Fox News, "Ironically, it may be controversy over the film that drives people into the theater. Gibson has seen this movie before. Literally. The more the secular press calls this weird, the more people are going to want to see what's in it. Gibson knows this. He's not afraid of the acid trip label. He used it himself.